Before I begin, I should probably note that I have no history of hallucinating. I don't do drugs of any kind, nor do I have any mental issues that I'm aware of that could describe what I saw. I'm a certified scuba diver, advanced open water diver if anyone's interested, and I sometimes go diving with my dad when we're on vacation. This time, we went on a diving safari organized by our local dive club to Egypt for a 5-day cruise, where we'd dive 4 times a day in different locations. The 4th one was always a night dive, meaning you're constantly using a flashlight and searching for unique sea life that stay hidden during the day. So we begin the night dive as usual. Me and my dad separated from the rest of the group to explore a coral reef, while others were following a large turtle. Keep in mind, though, we were all about a minute of swimming away from the yacht. Dad was busy inspecting the fish hiding in the reef, while I followed a ray into a shallow cave with my flashlight. I wish I didn't. The ray swam into a small opening out of my sight, so I took a look at the cave itself. Lots of green vegetation and some clamshells on the ground. This was all pretty usual stuff, until out of the corner of my eye, I saw something strangely white laying in the sand. I looked at it and felt my heart skip a few beats. It was a face. A human face. It was completely white, like a brand new mannequin. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but no. Clear as day, a human head with no eyelashes, eyebrows, or any hair at all. Just a mouth and a pair of closed eyes. I looked at it, obviously completely weirded out, thinking this must have been left here by some diver as a joke. I was about to signal to my dad to check it out when it looked at me. Out of nowhere, it just opened its eyes, and with that, I think a slight smile. All composure left me in an instant, turning around and swimming frantically out of the cave and towards my dad, while I started to hear some kind of low buzzing noise from behind me. He saw me coming at him and asked if I was all right with hand gestures. I responded by showing that something was indeed wrong, but since there's no sign in the diving code for a fucking demon, I pointed to my ear without thinking and asked to resurface. He must have seen the look of panic in my eyes, and he agreed. Fortunately, we weren't deep enough or submerged long enough for a safety stop to be necessary, so we just slowly reached the surface and went back on the boat where the rest of our group was already waiting. I didn't tell anyone what I saw so as to not freak the rest of us out. All right, everybody, welcome back to more Campfire Stories. Today, we're going to be focusing in on a set of mysterious and surreal stories from both viewer submissions and from the depths of the internet. These are some of the strangest, most disturbing stories we've had on the channel in quite a long time, so grab a snack, get comfortable, and shut the fuck up. It's just supply and demand, okay? A kid I went to primary school with invited me to his house after school one day. Not many people talked to him. I didn't really want to go, but I didn't want to be a dick like everyone else, so I said yes, but that I couldn't stay long. We went behind his house, and there were several bare spots in the grass. Some of them had a single stick poking up from the ground in the middle of them, while others had a thin plastic tube. He was very excited as he started digging up one of the spots with a hose poking out. Eventually, from out of the ground, he pulled up a jar with a dead baby bird in it. The hose was poked through a hole in the lid to let air in. He went on to tell me that he likes burying things alive. He said sometimes he seals the jar tight, sometimes he gives an air hose, and even puts a little food and water in to keep them alive longer. He said you can't bury them too deep, or else you can't hear them trying to escape. Occasionally, he would pour water down the tubes to drown the animal. I was maybe 8 or 10 years old at the time. I'm 52 now, and it still makes me sick. You know how you can identify people you've lived with for years by their footsteps? Well, my dad had Parkinson's for over 20 years. Parkinson's affects your ability to walk and thus causes a shuffling when trying to initiate movement. Unfortunately, my dad was a very stubborn individual, so he never listened to how the doctors told him to properly walk. What he would do is try to initiate walking without any walker, which would always be a rapid shuffle before he would lose balance and then fall on his knees with a loud bang. He would then get up, start shuffling again, fall on his knees with a thud, and repeat until he finally was able to get himself moving. As you can imagine, his knees were in terrible condition and were swollen to the size of bowling balls. I heard this series of shuffling and thuds pretty much every day for my entire life. Well, he unfortunately passed away in 2015 due to complications from surgery. A month after his passing, I was upstairs in my room, browsing on my computer. And that's when I heard that same series of shuffling and thuds that I had heard so many times before coming from downstairs. It went on for a couple of seconds and then stopped. I was home alone and nearly shit myself. I went downstairs and nobody was there. So this happened in Charleston, South Carolina around Christmas of 2017. I used to work at a popular coffee shop that was inside of a popular big box retail store. One day around Christmas time, I had 2 guests that struck me as odd immediately. They were pale Caucasian women, probably mid-20s, that both looked nearly identical, but one was about a head taller. They had the exact same, very straight platinum blonde bowl haircuts. Their faces were quite round and their eyes were a noticeably bright hazel color and were significantly larger than what you'd expect from the average person. They both also had this oddly stiff gait, as though they had a board strapped to their back. They kind of shuffled their feet around when they walked, too, and they both had on oversized sweaters, and I noticed later that the shorter one had theirs on backwards. The weird part, though, was their behavior. When they first walked in, the shorter one looked around the store as if they had never been in one before. Her overall demeanor was somewhat childlike. Like a normal customer service rep, I welcomed them in and told them to ask if they had any questions. The short girl looked to the taller one, almost as if for approval, before she slowly nodded her head towards me, mouth slightly agape, and then attempted a hand wave. Instead of waving at the wrist like most people, she waves with her forearm, palm flat and straight in a sort of robotic windshield wiper-like motion. She then turns to the taller one, who gives her an encouraging nod. They then proceed to walk around the cafe looking at the cups and merchandise. The short girl would often point all around the store and seem to be asking the taller one questions. Almost as if this was a guided tour of sorts. Now, obviously, I'm no linguist, but my city is a fairly popular tourist attraction, and I've met foreigners from all over the globe. Even if I don't recognize a specific language, I can usually estimate roundabout where it may be from, whether it's Germanic, Slavic, Asiatic, Mideastern, etc. in origin. But the language they spoke to each other was very strange and not like one I've ever heard. Imagine if you mixed Slimlish with Baby Babble and then sped it up. Lots of guh and blah and ooh sounds. They continued on checking out the merchandise and going on what seemed to be a Q&A session. They would often open up cups and look inside, grab bags of beans and squeeze and shake them. At one point, the shorter one took apart a coffee machine, and the taller one seemed to try and explain what it was for. This went on for about another 10 minutes or so when the shorter one picked out a studded cup to purchase. She shuffles her way to the register, puts the cup on the counter, frequently looking towards her friend as if for reassurance, who again does a simple nod and encouragement. She then looks towards me and attempts to smile, which was just showing her perfectly straight white top teeth as though they were biting her bottom lip and slowly nodding, not saying a word. It was here that I noticed her sweater was on backwards, the tag sticking out in front of her neck. Now that I had a good look, I will say that she was quite oddly attractive, but there was something about her appearance that gave me Uncanny Valley vibes, but I couldn't tell you what exactly was off. I will say I don't recall either of them ever blinking. I scanned the cup and went on the typical checkout spiel, to which there was no reply. When it was time to pay, she pulled out a silver credit card that had no markings on it whatsoever. No logos, no number, no name, just blank plastic on both sides with a chip. She then looks back over to the taller one and says something, who then comes over and finishes the transaction for her, showing her as though it was some kind of a lesson. I hand her the cup, and she once again slowly nods her head, mouth ajar, and does her windshield wiper wave. Then they shuffle their way out of the cafe into the rest of the store, and I never saw them again. I've told this story to people before, and they usually wave it away and say that they were probably just tourists from Europe, or maybe they had some kind of condition. But like I've said, I've encountered many foreigners, and none of them have acted this much like a fish out of water. Nor was their overall demeanor and behavior this uncanny. I won't rule that out as a possibility, of course, but it just doesn't quite sit as satisfactory for me. It was just too weird. The original poster of this story then followed up with an update below the post, stating that aside from the height, the sweaters being different, and the shorter one's speech being faster, these two were exactly identical. They also explained that the sort of Q&A that the taller one seemed to be giving to the shorter one was over literally everything in the store, from the signs to the shopping carts, even to the equipment behind the counter. She then ends the update by sharing this image with the following caption. I came across this image online just now and nearly shit my pants. Give this lady a bowl cut and make the chin rounder, and it's basically an exact match to the ladies I saw that day. The resemblance was just so uncanny that I had to share. Not really sure what to make of this story. There was a lot of discussion in the replies of this post where people were basically concluding that this was either just a weird set of twins or that it was aliens / some kind of weird humanoid creature. So I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. I've been a public school teacher for a decade. I've only ever been scared of one student. First of all, this was in my first few years of teaching. This student was of myth in my school. I taught at an alternative school for students that had been expelled from every other school, but overall, my students were pretty chill. They weren't good students, but if you met them at their level, things were usually fine. The exception was JT. JT was a sophomore when I met him, but at that point, I didn't teach him, but boy did I hear about him. Somehow, his mom was able to game the paperwork and education system enough that this kid was literally unpunishable. Everything was technically covered under a litany of 504 plans and IEP paperwork. So much so that this kid literally pushed an 8-month pregnant teacher down to the ground, and he was back 2 weeks later. He could literally punch a kid in the mouth and be back 2 days later, and because of this, he was just a massive problem. The first terrifying discovery for me was that his mom was very vocal about not wanting him home because she was scared of him. She had a good reason to be. JT, as a small child, tried to murder his family by lighting their house on fire. Specifically, he was trying to murder his brother by duct taping him to his bed while he slept. His brother survived, but had horrific burns. Somehow, that didn't stop him from supporting JT later on. JT was ruthless, but he was also only about 5'4", and his Krugered brother was about 6 foot and much physically stronger. I finally had the pleasure of teaching JT in his senior year. He had approximately 10 credits, all gym-based, and was nowhere near graduation. My first note was that this is the only kid I've ever met that just had nothing going on behind his eyes. He was shark-like. He never smiled or laughed unless someone got hurt. Cruel for cruelty's sake. One day, JT wasn't there, which frankly was odd. He had a great drug business going at school, and he only had to avoid one cop. The next day, we found out why he wasn't there. JT murdered a kid. Shot him in the face for apparently $12 and a little bit of weed. His lawyer tried to get his sentence lowered by arguing that it was technically his first offense since everything else happened when he was a kid. He got 25 to life. In 2016, we had just moved back to the States after living overseas for 10 years. My daughter was born here, but remembered nothing of it. When she was tiny, before we moved away, we'd go to the local mall sometimes, to the play area and to ride the carousel. One afternoon in September, we drove over there so she could see the old neighborhood, and we drove by the mall. It was almost completely shuttered, signs gone, parking lot empty, only a couple stores left. The food court was shut down, carousel and play area were gone. Even the theater across the road had closed. It was sad because this used to be a destination, kind of a super mall. When we got home, I told my husband about it and he wanted to see, so the next day he and I drove there. What I saw was the only thing that has ever caused me to gape, mouth open. The mall was fully open. Signs intact, anchor stores still there. As a matter of fact, every single lot had a store open for business. The place was full of people. Carousel going, play area full of kids. The food court was open. Across the street, even the theater was lit up and people were all around. I was speechless, literally. My husband started to tease me, but saw the confusion on my face and stopped. We got back in the car and went home. My daughter fully thought I was joking until I took her back there. She was speechless too. All of this is true. I don't know what happened that day, but it did happen. Neither my daughter nor I have viewed reality in the same way since. I had a dream that I was in an Irish airport with two women. Neither I'd ever seen, but both were distinct in their own way. One was almost bird-like with shock blonde hair. The other woman was heavy-set and wore a head bandana. The three of us ate at an Italian restaurant that had a neon sign of spaghetti and meatballs. I remember wondering why I'd dreamed about it. In any case, I wrote the dream down in my dream journal. Fast forward about 5 years to me being out of school, and I get sent on an emergency trip to go fix an issue at a site in Ireland for my job. Their network was apparently broken. They send along a couple of the women who write some of the ERP software and needed to work with some of the staff to iron out kinks. It was those two women, identical to the ones I'd seen in my dream. The bandana was because she'd just completed chemo for breast cancer. The other woman had shock blonde hair and was 50 pounds soaking wet. We even ate at that damn restaurant with the neon sign. I sat there aghast eating my chicken parm. Nothing like it has ever happened since. There was an old man, about 80 plus years old, who lived at the end of my street. I would walk my dog back and forth with no problems, until one day he comes out of his house shouting at me. Note that I'd never met him before. He starts screaming at me to leave with my dog, or else he'll shoot both me and him. I didn't appreciate being threatened very much, and even though he was older than me, I shouted back for him to go back inside the house and leave me alone, since the road was public property and I had poop bags. His son came out, winked at me, gave me the whole, it's alright, he's old, body language motion with his hands, and I left. 2 weeks later, there's police cars outside his house. The old man got into an argument with his next-door neighbor, who he shared a yard with, over a hose that was overreaching into his yard. The old guy shot him to death in front of his 15-year-old son. He aimed the gun at the son and pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed, giving the son enough time to run away. That old man died in prison, hopefully in pain, rotting away in both body and mind. I wonder whether my fate would have been different had his son not intervened when I was walking my dog. I was 19 and my sister called me to her room to show me something. She was playing a Skyrim mod where she was in a cave with spiders. She was fighting the spiders. I blinked, and then suddenly she was in a town. I was baffled and asked her, "Wait, what happened?" And she said, I said to her, "You were just in a cave fighting spiders, and now you're in a town." She looked at me in a concerning way and said, "What do you mean? That happened like 30 minutes ago. You just saw me come into the town through the main gates." I was just baffled and started to question if I was having a stroke. So I ran back to my room in a panic, wondering, how did I just apparently stand there for 30 minutes without memory of any of it? Eventually, I calmed down and moved on with my life without anything similar happening again. But any explanations as to what happened? I just closed my eyes for a split second and When I opened them, it seemed like 30 minutes went by. How is that even possible? This next story deals with a similar quirk of the mind, if that's what these are. We'll touch back more on this in a second. About half an hour ago, I was around my cousin at his wife's house. My uncle and aunt and other cousin and her husband were there as well. Everything was going normal. I'm not exactly the talkative type, but I will for their sake. While we're all in the living room, my cousin asks me if I'm seeing anyone, and I reply saying no, but that I'm currently interested in someone. The family then starts asking me questions about her, and I casually say that she's 30, which is 9 months younger than me. Their faces, all at once, just drop from smiles into scowls. She's younger, my aunt says. My cousin makes a strange gesture, like trying to comprehend what I've just said. But you're 31, says my cousin's wife, who is 3 years younger than my cousin. I'm like, yeah, wondering what's happening. Then my cousin stands up like, that's just sick, and storms out while everyone's shaking their heads. My cousin's wife is crying. My uncle starts to bellow at me, saying that while I was 18, she was only 17. I'm feeling super upset by this point. In a split second, they're all just talking and laughing amongst themselves. My cousin who walked out is sitting where he was before he walked out, and I'm just super confused. My aunt nudges me, asking if I'm okay, and I ask her if everyone just told me off. She says no, with a concerned expression. Apparently, none of that stuff that I just explained actually happened. Did I have a mini stroke or something? That whole thing happened in like 30 seconds. That story was only posted around 24 hours before I'm making this, and I honestly really just don't know what to make of it. Most people were saying that they should probably go see a doctor, and I have to agree, when something like this happens, it's probably not a good idea to just brush it off. If I had to take a guess, I'd wager that this person was talking to their family, and somebody made a joke about the age difference, leading them to kind of spiral from there for some reason. Whether this is actually what happened or not, it's always been terrifying to me how powerful the brain is when it feeds you false information, especially when you're unable to tell the difference between those delusions and reality. In 2001, I lost my 17-year-old son in an automobile accident. About 6 months later, a girl that went to school with my younger son told me she had a dream about my late son. She didn't know him well, but I was her cheerleading advisor. She said in her dream he came into the room and asked her to do him a favor. Tell my mom I love her, I miss her, and I'm okay. About a year later, another girl who had gone to his school but wasn't really in his circle either sent me an email. She had gotten my email from a family member of mine that she had recently met. She said she had a dream that she needed to tell me about. She said in the dream, my son had come into the room and asked her to do him a favor. Tell my mom I love her, I miss her, and that I'm okay. To say the least, I was stunned when I read that. A few months later, one of his best friends called. She had joined the military after she graduated, and we hadn't spoken in a while. She wanted to check in on me, and she wanted to tell me about a dream she had. It was word for word the same dream. 3 people who didn't communicate with each other had the same dream with the same message to me from my late son. Years ago, while working at a small town radio station, I stumbled upon an eerie coincidence. I decided to air an oldies song that I'd been humming all day, not one of our usual tracks. Shortly after it started playing, an old man called in, his voice quivering with emotion. Turned out he was the original artist of the song, a one-hit wonder from decades back. He said he hadn't heard his song on the radio in over 30 years and just happened to tune in that night while driving through our town. The song was his late wife's favorite, and it was her birthday. The odds of all of those things happening were so astronomical that it sent shivers down both of our spines. It's moments like that, when the universe aligns in the most hauntingly beautiful ways, that remind me just how mysterious life can be. A buddy of mine in the suburbs lived on a quiet street. One of the houses always had weird shit going on, and we always wondered if it was a grow-op or something. It backed into a popular walking path that I used to get home from school, and it was almost like nobody even lived there. Overgrown yard, nothing ever changed spots, curtains were always drawn, but all the lights were also on 24/7. One day, I actually saw like 5 Asian dudes in the backyard, and one was digging a hole for some reason. Also, he was missing a finger, which I didn't think much of. Well, one summer, my buddy and one of his neighbors noticed that every Tuesday, around 1 or 2 a.m., a Hummer would come down the street, throw a duffel bag onto the lawn of the house, and take off. Someone would eventually come out and pick up the bag within an hour of its drop-off. One day, my buddy's neighbor was out having a smoke and saw the drop-off, but he could see something sticking out of the bag in the darkness. Once the Hummer leaves, he goes over and opens the bag. Which is filled with some sort of AK variant assault rifles. What he saw sticking out of the bag was a barrel. In panic, the neighbor runs back to his own garage, still holding the rifle, and calls 911. He puts the rifle back and zips the bag, but nothing happens. The cops never show up, and eventually, someone comes out of the house and grabs the bag. The next Tuesday, the Hummer appears again for the drop-off. As it approaches the house, all hell breaks loose. Cops appear out of seemingly nowhere, armed with carbines. The SWAT team rips onto the street, as well as several undercovers. They arrest the 2 guys in the Hummer and raid the house. They were Chinese triad. They would store guns and drugs at the house until they got word to move them to their next destination. They dug holes in some spots to hide all sorts of different things. A few years ago, I went through a phase where I would try to learn people's names in my dreams, or tell them mine, hoping they might somehow find me. I knew it was impossible, but I did it anyway. In 2020, when I was 15, I had my first dream where someone told me their full name. I don't remember much about the dream now, but I was at my old school, and this person was standing at the entrance of a bus when he told me his name. Piotr Piatzak. I woke up a few seconds later and immediately searched for him on Facebook. I didn't remember what he looked like or anything, but I thought that maybe I would recognize something from my dream if I saw it. I didn't find anyone that stood out to me, so I let it go. Obviously, I didn't really expect anything to come out of it anyway, so I just continued with my life. Fast forward maybe 2 days later, and I'm sitting in the living room with my mom, watching the news. Suddenly, I hear the name Piotr Piatzak and I get this weird, unsettling feeling. It turns out he was a missing person. I swear I had never heard his name before, and I don't even watch TV. I told my mom and my best friend about it, but I didn't dwell on it too much. I would remember it from time to time, but that was it. Now it's 2024, and I was watching your video, and the experience you were reading reminded me of Pieter's story. I decided to check if there had been any updates on his case. I had never looked into his disappearance online before, and this was my first time reading about it in detail. The person who sent me this story then included a link to an article on the disappearance of the man. The article speaks of 31-year-old Pieter Pietzak, who went missing on January 23, 2020, after leaving kindergarten with his daughter and driving off in his Volkswagen T4 for a job interview. His car was later found abandoned and partially burned, with no trace of him ever being found, despite extensive searches by the police, firefighters, and his friends. Despite numerous public appeals and reported sightings, there has been no breakthrough in the case, leaving his family and friends desperately seeking answers. The following is an actual quotation from the article. Many hectares of land in the area were searched, but no trace was found. A tracking dog was brought to the site of the abandoned car. He followed the trail leading to a nearby roundabout on the Warsaw-Plock route. Perhaps Pieter got into another car, hitched a ride, or took a bus from the nearby bus stop. Julia, the viewer who sent me this story, then concludes with the following. That last sentence made my eyes water from being so uneasy. He told me his name while standing inside a bus in my dream. I know this doesn't mean he did use the bus, but still. I swear on my life I didn't make any of this up. It's still hard for me to believe all these coincidences. And on that wild note, we bring today's stories to a close. Thank you for watching.